Welcome to the Free and Redeem podcast. I am your host, Simon Andrade, and here on this specific show, we tackle over key topics that every single Christian struggles with. We bring in guests, we bring in godly wisdom, and more importantly, we bring in scriptures in the Bible to help you enhance your walk with God, bring in confidence, and put you into the direction of freedom and grace by the power of the Holy Spirit. If you're new to this platform, I encourage you to subscribe. With all that being said, guys, let's get started with today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Happy Saturday. Hope everyone is having a really good, productive weekend as you are listening to this episode of the Free and Redeem podcast. I know for me, I'm starting my day off by doing this episode and enjoying a nice hot cup of coffee. Sometimes you got to do that during the weekend, especially if it's been a long week. But today's episode I'm really excited about because not only are we starting a new segment, we are also kicking off from the Pain to Purpose series. As you know, we have covered a lot in the wilderness season. I really hope you enjoyed that segment. A lot of work was put into that segment alone, definitely a lot of prayer as well. But today's segment, as I mentioned in the last episode, we are going to tackle over a subject that I really do believe acts as a roadblock to a lot of people who may be listening today who may be stuck in a wilderness season. But we are not here to talk about the wilderness season anymore. We are here to talk about a really big roadblock. And what is that roadblock, you may ask? Well, it is forgiveness, or maybe you can say unforgiveness. And the reason why I'm excited to talk more on this subject, I know I kind of covered this subject a little bit before, especially when I first started the podcast. I feel like this is a very abused word in our church and just overall in our community. I feel like people just kind of throw this word around like if it's kind of an easier said than done kind of situation. What's really given me an inspiration to say that is I remember this one specific time. I think it was a Q&A I saw on this Christian platform. And this one lady straight up asked a question saying, I'm dealing with a lot of abuse from my husband, all this stuff, being very vulnerable about herself. And I remember the person on the Christian platform, their simple response was just simply forgive. Like, just forgive. And I really want to tackle more on this because forgiveness is more than just a word. It's more than just kind of like just the way we want to make it. And sometimes when I say we abuse it, I kind of feel like we kind of push it down other people's throats, like if they're supposed to do it because it's a good Christian thing to do. But you know what? I think the Bible, and I ultimately think the Lord himself really wants this word to be, it wants to be not only considered, and it's not only required, but it also, we want it to be as productive and manageable for someone who may be struggling in this area. And that's why in today's episode, we're not going to so much talk about how to tell if you're struggling with unforgiveness, because we've already covered that way back. And who knows, we'll probably cover it maybe in the next solo episode. But you may be asking yourself, well, am I struggling with unforgiveness? If you feel like you are, watch this video on the link above. I'll even have the link in the description. This is a very old episode. Actually, I didn't even record a video back then. This is how old or how new I was to the podcasting world at the time. So click on the link, listen to this episode, and you'll be able to tell maybe if you are struggling with unforgiveness. But today we are going to talk about simple 5 steps of how to forgive somebody. Not just so much determining if you have it, but how you can overcome forgiveness if you are struggling with it. And to really kick this off, step 1, I think, is a very vital step. But the craziest part about forgiveness is a lot of people struggle with this step. And it's so simple, but number 1 is if you really want to forgive someone you're angry at, you have to make the decision to forgive. Why do I say a lot of people struggle with that? Well, typically a lot of clients I get or people who come to me and they open up about this specific area they may be struggling with, more specifically if they're upset with somebody or angry at somebody, A very common pattern I have been seeing more specifically in this area is most people actually don't want to admit they're holding an unforgiveness. I don't know why, but I feel like that's one specific area that a lot of people refuse to be vulnerable with. Most of the time when people I kind of shed the light if there's unforgiveness towards somebody, a lot of times I get a lot of denial, like, "I'm not holding an unforgiveness towards them," or, "No, I've already chosen to forgive them," and then yet they'll continue to kinda just mouth off about another person or mouth off about an experience as if it still bothers them and it still occurred yesterday. Well, this is a very important step because I really feel like forgiveness starts with a decision. Here's the thing, sometimes if you want to fix a problem or solve a problem, one of the first simple steps you need to do is address or acknowledge that there is a problem. Another analogy I can give is if you want to be cured of a sickness, sometimes you have to realize that you have a sickness or there is a sickness in your presence. I mean, you even see this with people who are ill. I've seen people who, those stubborn family members, it's so clear they have maybe a severe illness, symptoms are all over them. And then yet, like, they're kind of like, no, 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 I'm okay. I'm not sick. I don't think I'm sick and all this stuff, and it's so obvious. And you realize if maybe they make the decision to get something done or to help them get better, they refuse to do that. This is a very important step because let me tell you, forgiveness starts with a decision. I don't understand. I mean, here today, I really want to kind of cover your decision to what you want to do in your healing journey. I don't know people who may be listening to this episode. I don't know what you've been through. And I think that's kind of why a lot of people deny that they're holding an unforgiveness is because they want people to understand what they've been through, what this person put them through, or whatever experience, traumatic experience that's occurred in their life. Most of the time, I think we just want people to understand what a person has put us through, rather if that's abuse, rather if that's mistreatment, if it was backstabbing, or ultimately maybe just saying this person just never understood me, and therefore you built up this anger towards them. And I even covered this in my the way one of the ways you can tell that if you're holding unforgiveness, it's called the downward spiral of unforgiveness. But I talk about one simple thing in there, and I basically just simply say, like, everybody has different experiences. I know that there are people that are dealing with darker experiences in this specific area. And I covered it. I said, man, it could be murder. It could be someone who hurt your relative. And it's just like you may not have even known this person, or sometimes even the worst case scenario, you may be angry at a person who's no longer alive. But the point I really want to make for step number one is you got to make the decision to forgive. Verbally say it. Verbally say it because if you make that decision to forgive, first of all, that's a sign of humility. If you can at least admit that you're angry at somebody, you're very angry at someone or multiple people, maybe, and simply say, hey, God, I'm struggling. I'm angry at this person, but I want to make a choice to forgive them. Simple as that, right? Well, it gets tougher because step number two is if you can make the decision to forgive somebody you're angry at, then number two is you got to make the decision to process forgiveness or transition into forgiveness, whatever you want to say. But point number two, what do I mean when I say make the decision to process forgiveness? Well, a lot of people can make a decision to forgive. But I think very few people, and this could be a huge majority of people who may be listening, have made the decision to process forgiveness. It's easy to maybe verbally say that you can forgive somebody, but what does your actions really show from that? I think a lot of people today have shown may have even verbally said, I forgive this person who has deeply hurt me or who has deeply wronged me. But I think their lifestyle kind of after that doesn't really show that. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of get stuck, or maybe sometimes not even a lot of people get started in their forgiveness journey because I think this is a tough thing to say, but forgiveness is not just about a decision. Sometimes it can be, but you got to remember, Jesus always kind of compared forgiveness to like a debt. When a debt is created, it's expected to be paid back. And sometimes, a lot of times today, unforgiveness is simply demanding a debt back from a sin or from a wrongdoing that was committed. And most of the time, it's not going to get paid back, even if it whatever that person wants. Forgiveness, it's about not just making a decision, it's about going through a process of what that debt was created in your specific life. So many words, what I'm really just trying to say is this is just because you make the decision to forgive, that's not going to just take your feelings away. That's not just going to cure your emotions. I think one of the best movie scenes I think I've ever seen, and such an underrated movie. I did not expect it to be this good, but I remember the movie The Shack with Sam Worthington and a bunch of actors, and really good movie. But if you haven't seen that movie, I encourage you to check it out. But I remember when I first saw that movie, it really impacted me, and it gave me this different perspective about forgiveness. It's basically about a father who his daughter gets killed by somebody, and it just takes him through this process in his life, or this transition in his life, where he's just stuck in this unforgiveness, and then he has this encounter with God, and God just shows him different parts in his life and all this stuff. But there's this one scene that's very iconic in that movie where he actually comes face to face with God himself, played by that one a Native American actor. I can't remember his name. But there's this one part that I'll never forget. Tears came down my eyes where he's arguing with God, like this man deserves to burn in hell. And God's simple response is, "So we're back to you as the judge." He says, "This one thing is devouring you." He goes, "You got to give it to me. You got to let it go." He goes, "Start." And then he says, "Start by saying it. Say it." And he goes, "I forgive. I forgive." And when he says that, you see this little plant come on his hand, representing like it's the beginning of a seed, like a seed was planted. A seed was being planted in this guy's soul. And then his simple response, Sam Worthington's response was, "I'm still angry." He goes, "I'm still very angry." I'll never forget God's response in the movie is he goes, "I know." And he goes, "And you're probably going to have to say, 'I forgive,' maybe 1,000 times." But he says, "But you're not going to do this alone. I'm going to be with you every step on the way." And that's exactly what I mean when I said make the decision to process forgiveness. You've made the decision. You have acknowledged that you're angry, and you realize that you are holding something against another person, whatever wrong they have caused you. But processing forgiveness is now choosing to show forgiveness by your actions, not just by your words. And I don't know what that looks like today for you. One of the things that I really did when it came to forgiving someone I was very angry at was I talk about this multiple times, and I even shed a lot more light on it on the audio episode I recorded almost a year ago, actually, come to think of it. But one of the things I talked about was I said I made that decision to forgive this one person in my life who deeply hurt me in a specific way. And I'll never forget, after I made that decision, I still stayed angry at this person. I would still see them. Oh my God, I was so upset with this person. I really, when I made that decision, I realized I had to show it. I had to really show that I wanted to forgive this person, even if I was still upset and still angry and my emotions were still there. And one of the ways I had to do that is I had to cut that person off out of my life completely. And it was hard. It was tough. Another thing I had to do was every time I would get triggered, I realized, man, I'm still very upset. I'm still crushed. I'm still furious at this person. I don't want to be this way anymore. So what did I do? There was this one point in my life where I'll never forget. I had this mental freak out or mental anger attack because of something this person did, even when I did cut them off. So it's like, even when, though I was separated from them, not even talking to them, not even having a relationship with them, I was still getting triggered by them, whatever they chose to do, what I would find out what they would do. And I'll never forget, I got on my computer and I just looked it up, how to forgive, how to forgive. And it's just like that this was important to me. Another thing I did too is I realized I had to pray. I realized I would scream out to God, "God, I'm so tired of being angry." And that's what I mean when I say process forgiveness. Your emotions may not go away. You may still be upset, rather if that's for a few weeks, a few months, maybe a year. But if you make the decision to pursue forgiveness, I can promise you, you will see a difference. But that's what I mean. There's a difference between a person who thinks that they have forgiven somebody and still shows that hatred, that anger, that bitterness, versus someone who still may be feeling those emotions of hurt and pain, maybe still wanting something to be done, but yet at the same time, they're still pursuing God. And that's exactly what I mean when I say process forgiveness, because even Jesus shed light on this. Matthew in the book of Matthew, one of my favorite verses in the Bible. I just want to quickly read it. But he says, "You have heard it that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." And that's what I really want to say is if you want to make the decision to forgive, what are your actions showing? Are you really wanting to pursue forgiveness, or is it just something you kind of just entertain for a little bit, but yet at the same time you're still kind of hanging on to, this one offense or multiple offenses that have occurred in your life? It's a process. And even Lisa Turkers, who wrote the book, I really encourage you to check it out. It's called Forgiving What You Can't Forget. She talks about the different types of offenses that occur in people's life. And he goes, sometimes we get like this $5 offense, someone makes a bad remark to you, someone says something to you that, yeah, kind of makes you get a cringe inside. I know I experienced that yesterday at work. But then he goes, they're the people that they give you almost $1 billion offenses, stuff that that they're never going to pay back for what they did. But she says, not only are you supposed to make the decision of what they did, you're supposed to now go through the process of the impact of what they did in your life. It's a process, but you got to make a decision to go through that process instead of just standing there saying, God, I forgive, and not choosing to go through the journey of healing. And if that really makes sense, those are very easy steps. What makes it tougher when it comes to going through the step-by-step transition of forgiving somebody when you're going through the process? Well, one of the big prominent things that a lot of people maybe struggle, or I can guarantee you a lot of people struggle with this when it comes to forgiveness. But the third step, and this is something to really pray about and really kind of just tackle in your heart, is release control. If you really want to pray about something that you're struggling with when it comes to forgiving somebody, a big one that is probably not mentioned a lot in forgiveness sermons or forgiveness podcasts or books, or I'm not even too sure what else, but it's like release control. Release control. What do I mean by that? Releasing control basically is no longer desiring the outcome or the reality of either that person's life or how you want your life to be based on your forgiveness decision. To kind of elaborate or rephrase this a little bit. So, a very common addiction I think a lot of people deal with in this specific area is wanting the need of control in their circumstance, in their situation. It's like this, it becomes an obsession. You need control of this situation. You didn't have control of what happened to you. So therefore we kind of our mind plays tricks on us a little bit. And I feel like sometimes the enemy kind of entertains this with a lot of people, but it's like that person needs to apologize for what they did to me. They need to acknowledge what they did. They need to be remorseful for what they did, what they said, how they acted, all this stuff. The control of justice. This person needs to go through something. This person needs to be held accountable for what they did. They need to see and feel how bad they have hurt me. Or, all this other stuff like their reputation, I know could be a really big one. I know I even covered this in the downward spiral of unforgiveness, but it's just like the need of their control of their reputation, wanting others to kind of feel the same emotions you're feeling and seeing the person for who they are. And if someone kind of shows a little bit of respect and, a certain perspective with them, like, hey, like this person's cool, in your mind, you start cringing, like, man, don't these people realize who this person is? They're narcissistic, they're messed up, all this stuff. And you just build this obsession. But if God had to really talk about what does he mean when he says forgive, it's releasing your control. A lot of times today, maybe you want control of something in your life because you didn't have control of it when you were younger, when you were vulnerable. You did not have control when you found out that person cheated. You did not have control when you found out that someone was going behind your back. You thought they were a good friend and they were just over here mouthing off about you, not really caring. I know what it's like to be in that position. I mean, there's so many scenarios I could really list. Hey guys, before we continue on with today's episode, I just want to remind you guys about BetterHelp, our sponsor for today's episode. BetterHelp is an online therapy platform, if not probably the largest online therapy platform, that gives you the opportunity to connect with a licensed professional all from the comfort of your own home. Once you click on the link and fill out a quick assessment, you will be assigned a counselor within your preference just within 24 hours. BetterHelp gives you the opportunity to now open up not just about your mental health or what's really bothering you deep inside, but to also deeply connect with that online community. You can change your counselor anytime, you could pay with however the preference is. And one thing to mention, as some of you who have been listening to this podcast for a while, you can now get 10% off your first month, all within my promo code. If you go to the link in the description called betterhelp.com/free and redeemed, once again, you'll be connected with a licensed professional. So, what are you waiting for? Click on the link below and sign up today for BetterHelp. Once again, mental health should probably be your priority. Okay, guys, back to the episode. But I really want to just tell you, we don't have control, even if we really wanted to. But sometimes, if we really want to go through that process, if we've made a decision to go through that process of forgiving someone, we have to give it to the person who is in control, and that's the Lord. The Lord is in control of our life. He sees the beginning and he sees the end. But sometimes he cannot get us to that end that we want if we don't choose to surrender that. And this is one of the big ways that we could really see a difference. I'll never forget there was one specific time. Yeah, there was one specific time where I was really holding this deep bitterness towards somebody. But I think the crazy story that I have not really even shared this story with anyone, but there was someone I considered a really good friend. He was not only a good friend, he was a best friend to me. And I met him in a community college. He was really close. We got really close. We would hang out almost every day. We were texting, and it's just like this person almost became like a brother to me. And what's really crazy, kind of long story short, I did not realize one thing that occurred towards the end of our friendship. I did not know this person was holding resentment towards me for a certain insecurity I think that they were dealing with at the time. So when he cut me off unexpectedly, I did not realize that there was like this built up emotion that was building up against our friendship. And I'll never forget when it occurred, the way it occurred, and the people he kind of like got to side with him, who I also really considered friends. It shocked me. But I can tell you one thing. I was angry. I was upset and I was hurt. I was so shocked. Like, man, I did not know you felt this way. Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you sit down? And it's just like I built up this obsession of wanting control. Because I did not have control of what this person was feeling. And I got so upset and I was just trying to plead my case to all these people. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't know I was doing this, all this stuff. And I remember I was so crushed. But I realized what really was a big difference in my life, or what really helped me fully move on, it took a while, was I realized I had to realize I don't have control of this situation, and I decided to just release it. I decided to pray and say, "God, this was a betrayal. This was, like, almost like a backstab, but I choose to give this to you." When I released that control, just a sense of peace came over me during this situation. I no longer needed an apology from that friend. I didn't even need to talk to him. And eventually, kind of the good news is like a lot of people who I unfortunately they were cut off too, other friends, they were brought back into my life. Never even, I mean, either of us didn't even do anything to each other, period. So I reconciled with friends. And then eventually I reconnected with this one person, this friend of mine. We talked, we sat down, we reconciled. And that is possible. Reconciliation is possible. But I want to specifically talk about what if it's not possible? What if it's, you're never going to see that person again? You probably don't even want to talk to this person again. Is it possible for you to still forgive? My answer is yes. Yes, you can. Because forgiveness is not about being cool with the person again. That's not what forgiveness is. A lot of people, misinterpret that and think that's what forgiveness is about. If you want me to be honest, forgiveness is not about that. What it's about freeing yourself, allowing God to free you from that offense and no longer allow that offense to control you. But if you realize that you are trying to release control, maybe the simple step to take after that is number 4, you got to allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to grieve and understand that what you went through was hard. What happened to you wasn't okay. It wasn't a right. And sometimes I think the biggest lie the devil tells people about forgiveness is if you choose to forgive them, you're saying what happened to you was completely fine. It didn't matter, all this stuff. No, it does matter. And God understands it matters. But sometimes the worst thing you can do during that process is avoiding your emotions and not allowing yourself to feel the emotions of rejection, feeling the emotions of abuse, pain, and betrayal, whatever it may be. It's hard. It's not something you just get over. It's not something you just, hey, I processed it and now I'm supposed to be okay. It's not that. It's not that at all. And people are allowed to feel their emotions during a hurtful situation. But sometimes I think the biggest struggle a lot of people have is we don't truly know how to handle them. And that's why I've really encouraged people, hey, sometimes if you really want to show forgiveness with your actions, that's why I encourage counseling. Maybe sometimes if you're trying to transition into a life of freedom, I recommend a coach, whatever it may be. It's okay to ask for help in your church, people who are going to be there for you, support you, but also hold you accountable with your emotions and not allow your emotions to take you south instead of taking you in the right direction. A good story I want to kind of like end off of before we get to the final step. Um, and I want to keep this a little confidential only because I don't know if like former coworkers of mine listen to my show or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of like a story, a recent story that happened to me very recently. But I'm sure if I were to say, how many of you need to forgive a former boss, maybe even forgive your current boss or employer? People who are listening, I'm sure a lot of people would raise their hands like, oh, yeah, that's me. That's me. But I really want to talk about a former employer of mine. And trust me, no, there are a lot of, oh my gosh, a lot of employers probably, I definitely needed to forgive. Some that were a lot worse than this one I'm about to talk about. But there was this one specific job I got possibly nearly about 2 years ago. And when I got this job, I connected with this employer and their spouse. They were very sweet people in the interview. I looked over the job description and I thought, man, this is something maybe I could really do. And it was actually my first big job. It was like a job I was doing. I was going to get paid a really good amount of money. And I was excited to really do that. The only thing I think that was very clear when I started this job was there were a lot of things I did starting that job where it was clear I was not experienced in it. And before I say anything about this employer, I want to just say this is a lot of stuff that I am doing today, more on a professional standpoint, I got to give him credit, because he he really taught me a lot of things maybe I did not know when I came into the business entrepreneurship world. And there are some things that were very valuable when I went to this place. But long story short, I started having a lot of run ins with this guy. I mean, who doesn't, honestly, if you're working with the boss? But when I went through this job, when I say run ins, obviously my inexperienced self in this specific job, a lot of his anger started coming out. But it wasn't like a boss like, "Hey, come on, let's pick up the pace," all this stuff. Like, no, it was like him verbally raising his voice at me in the office, sometimes even in front of other coworkers of mine. This kind of went on for a while. I was at this job almost for like a year and a half. And each and every month, if I had to be honest, I was literally at the edge of my seat thinking I was going to lose my job because he was so displeased with my performance. But yet I continued, went through other coworkers. And I'll never forget, and this is where I mean, I didn't want this episode to be too extended, but we'll make it work. I'll never forget, there was this one incident because there was a quota to meet. There was a lot of responsibility I started facing, kind of being a veteran in this job. I'll never forget there was one week where I did not hit the quota, and I had this one-on-one private moment with him, and basically, it was like sitting down, looking at me and saying, "I could fire you at any time I want." And so many words, it was like I don't wanna go into too much detail, but it was almost like a manipulating kinda situation, and I'll never forget, I just got so angry after that conversation. I was like, "How dare you?" And I'll never forget that next week, I was like, "I'm outta here." I literally was like, boom, just blowing up the Indeed, and I was like, "I just so badly wanna get outta here." And the moment I put in my 2 weeks, I actually realized something about this employer of mine. I don't wanna be too mu go into too much detail, but a family emergency happened where basically one of his sons was literally at the brink of death. And when I was about to leave that job, there was one thing that was so clear to me. It's like, we take people's actions very personally. We make it about us. And yes, even though we could say we're the victims and what happened to us wasn't okay, we got to realize maybe sometimes we don't realize what the other person's going through. Not to say, hey, feel sorry for that narcissist or understand what this person, who this person is, but we got to understand that sometimes we take that statement, hurt people for granted. We don't take it seriously, honestly. And when I was leaving, there was a part of me that felt bad, like, man, and realized that maybe his emotions, the emotions I'm experiencing from this employer of mine, it's not about me. It's the personal things he's going through. When I say allow yourself to grieve, well, I'll never forget I was leaving when I left that job and I started working other jobs. I actually realized that maybe a lot of stuff I went through at that place, I realized like, man, no, that was not okay. I started thinking about stuff that maybe, hey, I got to take it as a man, I got to take it as an employee, and I realized like, man, I can't believe I allowed him to do that. Like times where he would just sit down or he sat down, he called me out in front of the whole entire group. I'll never forget feeling embarrassed and my emotions were really starting to kind of like creep in. And that's where I felt like the Lord kind of came in and says, you need to forgive him. You need to forgive him. You're still kind of holding a little bit of resentment or you're holding resentment against him. But at the same time, I knew the Lord was standing there and he was saying, allow yourself to grieve. What happened? That wasn't okay. It could have been handled better. But I had to allow myself to grieve, and I hope you really kinda get a lot out of that story because it may be very common for a lot of people who are leaving a job, and they're trying to transition into a new job and face a new employer, but allow yourself to grieve, and if you can do that and those other 3 steps, then the last point I wanna give is rinse and repeat. Simple as that, right? Forgiveness, again, it doesn't happen overnight, especially for deep, dark offenses, but sometimes we gotta continue to pursue it. Even if we don't want to at times. Because for let me tell you, unforgiveness is rejecting God's peace. Pastor Vlad said it really good in one of his podcast episodes. He says, offense and betrayal, all that stuff, it's what someone does to you. He goes, but unforgiveness is what you do to yourself. You hang on to what happened and you allow it to define who you are. Forgiveness is saying, I am not what this other person did to me. It was bad, it was horrible, but it no longer controls my life. It no longer controls my peace. I deserve to live a new life. I deserve to live a life of gratitude and freedom. If you can do that, let me tell you guys, it's worth it at the end. It's a step by step process. And if you can get to the fifth step, rinse and repeat, say, I forgive that person again. Process forgiveness. What are the things you could do to really help you build forgiveness in your heart? I really encourage prayer. Is that reading the Bible? Is that listening to more podcast episodes, sermons about forgiveness? Is that attending a forgiveness self-help group? Whatever it may be, make that decision to process it. And number 4, release the control. What are the things you want control of and you realize you don't have control of it? And allow yourself to feel your emotions. Talk about your emotions. If you have to do that 1,000 times, I'll promise you, you will see a difference if you include God in your healing journey. And I want to end this episode off in prayer, but I want to encourage people to kick this segment off. Forgiveness is worth it at the end. It's a process, and let me tell you, it is worth it. And if we can bow our heads in prayer, Lord, we thank you for allowing this episode to be spoken over people today, God. I pray that this episode reaches not just a few hundred, not just a few thousand. I pray that this reaches billions of people as long as it stays on this platform, Father God, for many years to come. I pray that someone who is listening today and you are telling them now that they are not listening to this episode by accident. You are telling them that this is what they were meant for. They were meant for forgiveness. And Father God, today I pray that the person who may be struggling with anger, I pray that they make the decision today to take that first step and trust you in this journey, God. We thank you for all of this in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Awesome, guys. Well, once again, don't forget to subscribe. Stay tuned for more episodes. I'm excited about what episodes are going to be released on this segment. We will cover more on this segment as well. This won't be the only segment we will do. But with all that being said, guys, God bless.